name is David Ingram. I'm a senior SDET. I work at a startup called Madium. We're focused in the supply chain, trying to optimize the movement of materials in the United States and then hopefully in the world to reduce plastic waste as well as carbon emissions. A not so fun fact is only 21% of recyclable material is captured, at least in the United States. So if you have a passion for this, if you want to do your part, make our world a better place, feel free to reach out to me at my LinkedIn, connect with me, or just anything about automation or QA in general. I love talking with people throughout the community. Okay, so whether you are starting from scratch or evaluating a current setup, how do you actually measure success of a test suite? How do you know your test suite is actually good? Are you currently happy with your test suite? And if you aren't, do you know how to improve it? In order to answer and define what good actually means in our tests, let's take a look at why we write tests to begin with. So ultimately, we want to write tests because we want to increase product quality and confidence, right? We want to catch more bugs. We want to have improved or decreased quality risks going out the door. But we also write automation tests for consistent validation. A little bit more reliable than manual, a little bit quicker. You can run tests over and over again, which then, of course, leads to happy customers. Less bugs, happy customers, happy business. We've all gone through this talk before. But that's not all. Automation should also support the acceleration of development and deployment. We should be able to write automation tests that allow us to fail faster, meaning we're catching issues earlier, reducing quality cycles, which then, of course, leads to quicker releases. So we're getting more into our customers' hands a lot quicker. So when we talk about how good a test suite is and how impactful, we're going to always be coming back and referring to these two bullet points, meaning every decision that we want to make in our test suite should support one of these. So how do we get there? So I've created what I like to call the automation maturity pyramid. And yes, of course, it's a pyramid because we love pyramids in the testing space. Can't get enough of them. But the automation maturity pyramid measures how effectively your current test suite is and breaks down what you need to target each step of the way in order to ensure that we eventually get to a highly impactful test suite. There are 4 phases of maturity. And while we dive through each phase, I encourage you to reflect on your own setups, see where your biggest struggles are, so that you can reflect and start to move forward. I should stress that this is not going to happen overnight. It's likely going to take months, maybe even years to get to that last phase of long-term impact. But knowing where you are now is going to be critical. So again, we can ensure continuous improvement. We're going to be looking into what each phase is solving, the value that it brings, and how you can implement what you need to implement within that phase in order to achieve it. This pyramid and this framework can be applied to any automation tool or framework, but obviously this is CypressConf. We love Cypress. So we're going to be highlighting how Cypress can assist in each phase throughout the presentation. And then finally, as we discuss each of these phases, I just want you to think of this tool as a helper. It's not going to, by any means, fully represent everything you need to do. It should be treated more like a guideline because every team is different. We all have different setups, different applications, different needs, different business requirements, but it should be a good base and starting point to reflect and evaluate your impact. There's going to be so much to cover. So if I'm going to be moving a little bit fast, I really apologize, but that's why this is being recorded. There's a lot to cover. And so we're just going to dive into it full speed. So we're going to start looking at what that first phase is, which is all about confidence. Much like a real pyramid, you can't build the top of the pyramid without building that strong foundation first. You need to target ensuring confidence in your automation test suite before anything else comes. So what is this phase all about? So the phase, the question that we asked in this phase is, can we actually just trust our tests? It's very simple, but that's a very powerful question. And when you can trust them, then that means that your results are actually valuable, meaning you're catching real issues and not just some flakiness or bad test code. This phase also sets the foundation of quality for all of the other decisions that we're going to make moving forward. So how do we accomplish this phase? Why is this our first priority? Well, we do this by addressing flakiness, ensuring that we have a plan so that the environments we run our tests on are stable, and also that we have a strategy for the data that our tests need, ensuring that we always know our tests are going to get the data that they want. So let's take a look at that first, and probably the most horrible slide we'll see, which is flakiness. Oh, my eyes, it hurts. We all hate flakiness. It's, of course, going to impact all of us. It's when you have different test results, despite there seemingly being no differences, of course. So you run a test once and it passes, you run a test again and it fails. And it just invalidates our test results entirely. We all fight it. There are so many factors to flakiness highlighted below. And of course, this isn't even the complete list. I do believe that even though flakiness obviously has an impact on our test results, flakiness is also a mentality because it's very, very easy to just bury and ignore through like retries, just retry the test till it passes. But of course, that undermines all of the efforts that we're trying to get towards to an effective test suite. Flakiness is going to require full team collaboration and support, especially during those hard times when it's going to slow down everything that, especially in the engineering, in your engineering teams. It's going to happen, especially when you commit to addressing flakiness. Things are going to stop, but you have to be committed to that. You have to be accountable to the process so you can get over that hump. Again, we're not going to go into all of the technical weeds here on how to squash flakiness. There are so many good resources out there for each one of these factors, but you have to have a plan in place on your teams to get your test to a fully or nearly fully green state, confident state early. For me, I just have the mentality of the test must pass. That's kind of it. It's simple and it's true, and it's kind of goofy to say out loud, but it's also a very powerful phrase. It's just simply the test must pass. And if the tests don't pass, well, my team, we stop everything. We don't allow changes to go through until we understand why they aren't passing. Whether that's flakiness or a real issue, we treat both the same. We then hold ourselves accountable, have that conversation, and create action one way or another. Of course, there's going to be exceptions to this, but having this rule in place, again, always spurs some sort of action so that you're never just ignoring a test failure. Cypress, of course, supports flakiness with CI/CD retries, experimental retries, so having extended functionality on how you want to identify a test failure or a test success, and then lots and lots of awesome flake detection, categorizing analytics throughout Cypress Cloud. Lots of amazing flake stuff there. The next part of our first phase is environmental stability. Where we run our tests is equally as important to what we actually run in our tests. You could have a perfect test and run it on a terrible environment, and those test results are going to mean absolutely nothing, of course. So you have to have environmental stability. So having this plan is critical, of course, to also ensuring the confidence that we want. So ask yourself, where do you plan to run your test? Is it on a hosted environment, something that's permanently up, an ephemeral environment or temporary environment, something we spin up and tear down? Are we going to run our tests in the test runner locally or in the pipeline, which are going to bring different race conditions because the pipeline typically runs faster? What about multi-environment support? Do I need to run tests against UAT and develop and local? And can I easily do that? And can I trust all of those environments? So you need to have a plan in place. You need to ask yourself, how can I guarantee stability? Questions also like, is my environment going to be shared? Which is okay if it is, but if it is shared, could that cause problems? Could other people break my tests by accident? Could I break them? These are questions you need to have a plan in place ahead of time. Consistent code and configurations, especially for multi-environment support. Always ensuring that you're running tests against the same conditions, or in some cases, different conditions, but do you have visibility into those conditions? Do you know different code is pushed in different places so that when test results are different, you're not scratching your head wondering what's going on? And then, of course, the big one, load and resources, which lead to a lot of race flakiness that is very easy to forget until it hits you later on. So thinking about, if I'm going to be running on different environments, make sure that you're handling and writing your tests so they're a little less flaky and a little bit more dynamic with their weighting. All right, that last piece of confidence is all having a strategy for test data management. So what data does our test need, and how are they going to access it? There's lots of different strategies for this as well. And again, it's up to you to find the best strategy, but you need to have a plan in place ahead of time so that when your tests run, you're setting them up to succeed. These are just things we need to consider from the get-go when we're writing our tests. So there's of course external. So, maybe not as highly recommended, but manually creating the data yourselves. But of course that creates a dependency within your tests. So your tests are now dependent on some external thing that must run like a seed script. There's lots of ways to create data within a test that I've listed below, a lot of awesome commands. My personal favorite, of course, is programmatically creating your data through the API. This means I love doing this because when each test can control its own data, then it becomes data independent of other tests and of other environments. So I can just point my test to any environment wherever I want, and it's going to handle its own data creation and data cleanup if it needs. So that's a really, really awesome pattern that I'd recommend if you're not doing that already. But you just have to have a plan in place. And then finally, if you're creating data, always also think about, do I need to clean it up? Especially in cases where if you're creating the same data over and over again, could that prevent the test from being able to rerun multiple times? So do you need to clean up data? And then maybe it just doesn't matter and you don't need to worry about it. So we've taken a look at the first phase that you should ask yourself, which is all about, of course, ensuring confidence. Phase two is now looking at the short-term impact of our automation test suite. So the question that this phase asks is, what value do our tests provide for each chunk of dev work? Now, a chunk of dev work, I just mean like a feature, a bug, a code change, just any short-term change that is being accomplished on the day-to-day. Well, now we're starting to look at this phase that our results are actually useful. We trusted them before. We have all these pretty passing tests, but now we're actually running them against something real. And the results when they fail or pass are telling us that, we're actually having a quality check as part of our software lifecycle. As part of this phase, we're also going to start catching those pre-production bugs. So less things are going to go out to production, which means that this phase really targets release confidence. Ultimately, is we feel really good that we've built this test suite up so we can release more confidently. So this phase is all about having a very strong CI/CD strategy and ensuring that we have a strong result visibility. So CI/CD strategy is, as I'm sure you guys all know, is just simply when and how we decide to run our tests. There are lots of different approaches to this. And again, it could look uniquely for you, especially on your own team. A couple common ones that are out there are just running a test suite nightly. This is usually where most teams start just initially, is just run it once a day or once a night, get those test results. However, and a point I'll bring up later is this can't be the final solution, especially when we talk about the next phase, because when you run your test suite only once a day, you leave 24 hours worth of other potential changes to run. So if there are ever any other failures that happen, and you have to debug and troubleshoot them, now you have to go through 24 hours worth of impacts or changes, meaning it's going to take a lot of time to understand what actually happened. So it's a very good first place to start to ensure stability with your test suite, make sure things are going, but I don't fully recommend it as a long-term solution. I always support pre-merge testing, so running your tests on each commit before you merge changes. This, of course, supports shifting left, which is moving quality earlier in the software development cycle. So we want to provide our test validations fast, and that way we can then rely on those test results before we actually merge our changes. Cypress, of course, has a lot of CI/CD integrations. I think I've used maybe 3 different tools with Cypress, and they've all been easy to implement. To be honest, Cypress has a lot of Circle CI orbs, Docker images. It's actually very seamless to integrate with Cypress in your test suite. In your CI/CD provider to start running your tests in the pipeline. And then, so this way that our test results are always tied to some sort of change so we can actually start getting value out of them. But just because we are actually now starting to run our tests, it doesn't mean that those results are useful until we have a plan in place to get visibility out of those results. So we need to have a plan in place when failures happen or even successes happen. We want to know how we know what failed or what passed. We don't want it to just be buried. So reporters are a really good first step for this. A reporter just being some sort of integration that takes the test results and returns it in some sort of like consumable format, like Mocha Awesome, if you're familiar with that one. But also the timing of your results matters too. So ideally, you should have a notification or some sort of integration where you are immediately notified when your test results fail, or even pass. You want to know those test results. You don't want to just run a test suite, forget about it, come back 3 hours later. Now you've context switched. Maybe a ton of other changes have gone in. You're doing yourself a disservice, especially when issues pop up. It's also important to have a plan in place for artifacts. So artifacts being screenshots, videos, error messages, error logs, anything that can help you troubleshoot that might have happened in the pipeline. So when those failures do crop up, it makes it very like a seamless transition to understand what is going on, especially when you don't have immediate eyes on it. Cypress, of course, has the ability to bundle artifacts in cloud, branch review, so allows you to understand when flakiness or failures occur immediately, what that breaking change was on that branch, as well as a lot of tool integrations such as Slack, GitHub, Teams. The screenshot in this slide is just from a fake project I used to demo where it's telling me I have a ton of bad tests, and I know I'll get there, I'll fix them. But this is awesome because it tells me immediately, like, hey, whoa, 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 these are all your tests, test results. Here's what's going on. Take a deeper look. Okay, so now that we have solid tests we're confident in, sweet. We are starting to provide quality feedback against our changes, which is awesome. This third phase is now starting to target accelerating engineering changes and encouraging quicker releases because we're going to be encouraging a quicker process. So this is all about speed, optimization. How do we optimize our tests and our automation process? I'm going to start with the how on this slide. So we accomplish this by simply just doing things faster, which sounds silly, but it's true. We just get better at it. We want to write tests faster. We want to troubleshoot tests faster. And we just want to run tests faster. And doing all three of these is going to allow us to increase our overall test coverage, because being able to write tests faster means we can write new tests quicker, and we have more time to write new tests because our tests are more stable. We're maintaining less over time. Of course, now having the ability to troubleshoot faster is going to encourage painless debugging, which I know maybe has never been said before. Debugging is terrible, but it really, honestly, it doesn't have to be, especially when you get to the point of spotting a failure immediately right after a change has happened. You usually know exactly what is going on. You don't have to spend days and days on it, which I'm sure we've all done in the past. I've certainly spent like up to a week on a test failure before, not sure what happened. So it always doesn't have to be painless. We can speed this process up. Of course, this then also allows us to fail faster, running tests faster, catching things quicker, letting the rest of our team know when real issues crop up, which then in turn allows us to release faster. So we're going to take a look at the first optimization, which is being able to write tests faster. So truly, in the last couple phases, you could actually write tests pretty poorly and still get a lot of impact out of them. We could trust these kind of poorly written tests, and we could run them and we can get impact. And that's awesome. But now we want to focus on how we can do this whole process, a little bit more optimized. So being able to write tests faster is going to allow us, again, to push things forward a little bit quicker over time. So there are a lot of ways to and suggestions to writing tests faster. First and foremost, I would start with organization. Define some pattern and some structure within your test suite. Some examples of this include like page object model, maybe using something like BDD approach. I personally don't use either of these. I've created kind of my own framework that blends a lot of different concepts that just works for me, that I found is really successful for me personally and the applications I've worked on. But in truth, and what I really believe is ultimately it matters less what patterns or type of framework and structure that you decide to use. And it just matters more that you have one and you hold yourself accountable to it. Yeah, maybe some patterns are better than others in organization, but you can always optimize those over time as long as you're following it, especially with teams that have multiple engineers. Because if you don't have this, then you have 5 different engineers creating tests with 5 different selectors across, or writing helpers in 3 different files, and it's the Wild West out there, and nobody knows what's going on. So when we try to write new tests, code is all over the place. Maybe you've been in this situation before. If you just had some sort of organization, even if it wasn't the best, you can still see how having those patterns in that organization allow you to, and that clarity just allow you to write tests quicker and scale faster. Next, also, I would really immerse yourself in best practices throughout both the coding space, automation space, Cypress. Best practices exist for a reason. They're universally or commonly maybe accepted as optimizing something. It's considered best for a reason. However, don't just do it. And I mean this seriously. Just because something is a best practice, don't just implement it. Really understand the why first. What makes it a best practice? What problem is it solving? And maybe you don't need to always implement it then, or you can implement part of it or tweak it so that it is working the best within your own solution. So understanding the why is more important than just blindly following someone else's advice. Is really just the advice exists for a reason, but you should truly understand it so you can make it work the best for you first. An example of this might be DRY, don't repeat yourself, dry, which is really crucial in application development where we don't want to repeat a lot of application code. Maybe that's not as important with test code. Maybe it is. I always still try to treat my test code like my application code, but maybe you don't always have to follow that best practice because it's not as crucial within test code. So finding that balance between optimizing and speed is really important within your framework to allow you to write tests faster and leads to a better engineering experience for everyone. Okay, and then finally, this third one, document your code. Sorry, put the pitchforks away. I'm so sorry to bring up documentation, but it truly does matter, especially when people get started on your team, onboarding. Document your patterns, document maybe your best practices or just how you run your tests in general. I always like to think of it that what do I wish I had that I didn't have when I first got started somewhere? And if you have an answer to that, make sure then you provide it for somebody else moving forward so that we're always passing knowledge on. We're always improving and allowing new onboards, or even if you revisit something after a year or several months, a better experience so that they can start with that process a little bit quicker. And then, of course, it would not be an optimization discussion without referencing AI. Simply, AI is not going anywhere. Sorry to say, it's going to continue to impact our field, but it's also awesome and super powerful. So I encourage you to learn like chatbot AI, IDE integrations such as Copilot, play with them, see how they can help you, see how they can optimize your process. I use Copilot every single day, and I really love it. It doesn't, it doesn't write all the tests for me, but it learns my patterns and my styles, and it helps autocomplete things. It helps recognize things, and I am able to write tests really really fast now, just using Copilot because I'm spending a lot of less time just typing things on my own because it kind of picks up on them. So it's really cool. And I would recommend everybody plays with AI a little bit so you can start to get ahead of that curve. Cypress, of course, has a lot of custom commands that if you're not taking advantage of, it's like their super special secret sauce. They're fantastic, really help you reduce code duplication, but also optimize writing tests faster. Lots of community plugins. Definitely reference community plugins. There are hundreds of amazing plugins out there. So even if you think that you're maybe happy with your current solution, just check out what the plugins that exist because the community is amazing and they have saved me hundreds of hours just because of all the amazing tools that I've been able to add to my own test suite and commands. And it's really cool. And then finally, I always recommend to follow the community that you're in, whether this is automation, Cypress. Truthfully, we only get a tiny slice of all of the engineering problems that exist in the entire world. And so following others, even just kind of passively and learning from everybody else's experience and tips and tricks is going to save you numerous hours in the long run and just increase your own skill set on the side. So definitely follow the community, learn from others. We're all in this together and potentially give back to the community long term if you're in a place to share your own experience. So now we're going to talk about focusing on how we can optimize debugging a little bit quicker. So debugging, it honestly just comes down to how fast can you read your test and understand your tests. That is the really big first key impact. There is, do I actually know what I wrote and can I break it down, especially those tests that you wrote months ago. So the first most important part I would say to this is your test should be independent. Yeah, maybe not everybody is able to do that. There are always some limitations, but try to strive to the point of test independence, because when you try to troubleshoot a test and it's doing one thing, one use case, it's relatively small, it's going to make it so much easier to understand the failure, break down what happened, break down all the impacts that could have led to that failure versus a test that is dependent on three other tests ahead of it, or just running through a full suite of the application and it's failing 300 lines deep. And it's going to be a headache. So really strive for test independence. You're not going to regret that. Also, don't just assume others are going to know your code as well, especially again, if you work on a team. Really build up a culture of code reviews. Test code in general, I don't think it's enough attention with code reviews. I think maybe it's not seen as, as important to review. It's just test code. It's not going to hurt anything, but it's going to hurt the time we spend debugging and supporting our tests later. So especially if you work on a team, try to build up that culture again of accountability, and encourage everybody to write cleaner tests or more readable tests. Spending just a little bit more smidge time up front for readable code can just save you tons of hours and headaches later in the future. At this point, again, I would just also recommend trying to run your tests immediately after changes. So pre-merge, directly after merge, work on that pipeline, optimize that pipeline to really save you headaches in the future when issues do occur. Whether this, again, is app code, test code, environment changes, have your test trigger, run those tests. Because when a new failure occurs, especially if we have, again, that strong confidence in our test suite, and we're pretty sure it's not flakiness, you can immediately identify what broke it, which means then there's a lot less guessing and we can start to move on and it's painless. So really try to move your test to run as close to changes as possible, and it's just going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Some things I like to ask myself when I start to debug, some tips and tricks, are don't just kind of blindly dive into something, a failure. Just don't dive right into the code. I always ask myself these questions first, because I've spent personally messed up and spent maybe hundreds of hours, of course, my career looking and debugging the wrong things because I just got too excited about a failure or a red herring. So just always take a step back first. Ask yourself simply what changed. Again, was it a test code, app code? What was the change? Was nothing. Maybe the answer is nothing changed and we got a failure. That's a viable answer too. And then what were the conditions of the failure? Is it failing on multiple branches, a single branch, multiple environments, in the pipeline only, maybe only the test runner? Asking yourself just these questions up front, spending like 2 minutes to ask these, can really, really break down the story of what might have happened and allow you to then optimize getting to the actual solution a lot quicker than just kind of guessing. Cypress, of course, has the test runner locally, test replay with the cloud. So if you ever want to be like a wizard in time travel, this is your opportunity, or as close as you'll probably get to it, where you can go play with test replay, get a look and see what happened in the past, and kind of feel really cool about it. Makes debugging cool, I guess. Super powerful. And then, of course, there's a lot of developer tools that Cypress supports as well to help troubleshoot issues. Okay, the last piece of our test optimization that we're going to focus on is being able to run the tests quicker themselves. Obviously, the first and easy win to do this is just parallelize your tests, run them across multiple machines. If you have 100 tests, now you can split them maybe on 10 machines, and now they're running 10 tests each. It's just going to be a lot quicker. We all know this, especially if we have invested so much in test independence, data independence, and confidence. Parallelizing is actually going to it should be a very seamless transition. That's why we target all of these other things earlier, so that we are able to then support ourselves up for success later. It should be very, very easy to transition. If you don't plan for these things, you could actually parallelize your test and get tons of failures because you have tests running at the same time that are now impacting one another. There's a bunch of race condition failures. The environment can't handle it. It could be a nightmare. So parallelizing is always a good thing, but it could have some bad side effects to your test if you're not considering things early ahead of time and getting to that point of confidence. You could also have a plan for tagging tests, running a subset of tests. That's a good strategy, especially when you have greater confidence in your application, or you potentially just don't need to run as many tests for every single change. Like if you have a one-line change in one file over here, and maybe you don't need to run 80% of other tests over here. So having a bunch of different strategies to target different tests is really good. Could also just be a cost thing, too many test results, too much cost. So always trying to balance speed versus cost versus test confidence is a wonderful conversation to have within your team if you're not already having that. And then, of course, that environmental performance. Again, this is another place to review the stability of your environments, especially if you're running in parallel. I once introduced parallelization into one of my test suites, and it broke all the tests because we hit a bunch of rate limits just trying to authenticate. Something I didn't even consider, but the environment was just not set up for success. And so we ran into a bunch of issues. So always, again, just making sure we're confident in our tests, we're confident in our environments, and we can marry those two together for the best impactful test suite. Within the code, there are lots of awesome tips. I've included a few. To minimize unneeded DOM interactions. So if you have a lot of UI set up within your tests, see if you can replace that with API calls using CUI requests. Request calls are way quicker usually than the UI, and you don't need to rely on unneeded DOM setup, which could also cause flakiness or unneeded UI dependencies for tests that don't need it. Of course, eliminate hard-coded weights with strategies like safeguard assertions, dynamic weighting with like CUI intercept. Lots of good suggestions out there. Mock responsibly. So lots, again, CUI intercept, you can mock request calls. Maybe some request calls you don't need, but always use this responsibly. I once worked on an app that fetched a ton of logos. It took about 10 seconds to boot up every single time I wanted to hit this app, and which was causing a big impact on the performance of my tests. So I just simply mocked that endpoint. We kind of ignored that real call. I shaved off a ton of time, especially because 99% of my tests didn't need logos. So just mock responsibly, save yourself time when you can. Then these last two tips might not be as common, and they come from the wonderful engineer, Murat Ozkin. So shout out, thank you so much for these. Has a wonderful suggestion on reviewing the preprocessor you use. So Cypress uses Webpack under the hood, but there's lots of other community plugins, such as ESBuild. So just changing the preprocessor you use could actually maybe potentially speed up how quickly Cypress is able to start and execute your tests. So you're not getting that spinner going on. Another great suggestion is always reviewing your plugin imports. Every import that you or every plugin that you have defined at a global level means every test is going to try to import that. So if you're weighing down all your tests, importing a ton of plugins, you could also really be causing latency when trying to boot up Cypress as well. So those videos are attached as reference. I definitely recommend it. All of his wonderful tips and tricks. Cypress can support this phase, of course, parallel support, CUI session for authentication, and then a couple awesome, really cool cloud features, which allow you to fail tests and also prioritize tests for speed a little bit quicker. Okay, so that's a lot. Again, thank you for sticking with me. We've invested in confidence, optimizing tests. We're now providing tests at a feedback at a small scale. This final phase is about long-term impact on our application. So we're asking ourselves, what value do these tests provide for long-term product quality? So this is really just all about using data and getting metrics to define the impact of our automation. So we can actually measure the impacts of what we're doing. So this is all about minimizing product issues and interruptions long-term. So really trying to catch as much as we can, which of course then leads to that, increased stakeholder confidence, happy business, happy customer, happy everyone, right? A perfect world, no issues. But I believe we really accomplished this by starting to focus on quality dashboards and metrics at this point, which then drives the rest of the pyramid. So we can kind of constantly funnel through each phase again and continue working on areas of improvement. So quality metrics. I think quality metrics and just the word metrics in general could have a negative connotation. I really don't believe it should. Metrics should always tell a story, but they should not be the story. We should use metrics to track our improvements and our areas of improvements, but they should never just be used as a form of punishment. If anything, you should always encourage bad metrics. I would want to know where something is bad, but it shouldn't be, again, used as a form of punishment. It should be used to tell a story. So how do we improve these metrics? One metric, of course, I'd recommend is code coverage. Again, use it with caution though. Code coverage is a fantastic metric, but it doesn't tell you how good your application is, and it doesn't tell you how good your tests are. You could have a single test that runs through the entire app and have like 99% code coverage, and of course that test is terrible. So it should just tell a story again where you might be missing areas of to cover. It should help you guide you to better optimizing the rest of your process. Of course, flakiness should always be tracking this if you're not. We want to keep that flakiness percentage down. Test execution time, so tracking how long your tests take versus how big they are as they grow. What is the threshold that your team is comfortable waiting for a test result to finish? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 7 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? And if you go over that threshold, do you have that, again, plan in place to run your tests faster, optimize them, hold yourself accountable to your data? Test maintenance and tech debt. This one's a little bit harder to track, but might just be a little bit more manual, but just trying to understand how long it's taking you to troubleshoot things. So if you're spending, a full day trying to debug every single test, how do we get that number down? Start evaluating what we're doing in that process. Again, why is it taking us so long to troubleshoot? How do we get that down to 3 hours and then 2 hours? And then, within maybe minutes of being able to identify what's wrong. Defect detection efficiency, DDE, that's a fun one, is all about just how many bugs is our application or our automation actually catching. So if we caught 100 bugs in the month and 90% of them we caught in automation, that sounds really good to me. That's 90% DDE. However, then, of course, we want to tell a story. So why did we miss those other 10? Where did they come from? How do we continue to improve? Again, we're not looking at it negatively. We're just asking ourselves these questions. So we're always moving the needle forward. And then for every single metric, your test results should be visible, even the bad ones. Again, we should encourage transparency and honest communication within our teams. We want to build up that culture of accountability in a space where we ask ourselves, how do we fix this together, rather than just, why is this wrong? And the reason is because ultimately, the hard truth is customers do not care about anything I've talked about. They do not care what's going on behind the scenes, which is why as a team, we should all be accountable for the quality of the end product together. So we should not be using these as punishments within our team because the customer does not care if they don't care all the things we've done. They just want the best product possible. Cypress, of course, has a lot of data analytics and cloud. Code coverage support, you can now extract that data using data extract API, share with all your stakeholders, super cool. And then really, really awesome UI coverage, which again is kind of like code coverage where it kind of tells you and hints at maybe these areas in your application aren't covered. You might want to, build a test for that or build a validation. Okay, breathe with me. That was a lot, long run-on sentence, but thank you for sticking with me. If there's anything to take away from this, and as you begin your journey writing test automation, or if you're in the middle of your journey and evaluating your current test suite, and if it's actually good or impactful, always just remember the why. Why are we writing automation tests? Always break it down for what is your purpose for what you're doing on the day-to-day, because I think it's easy to forget why we're doing what we're doing. We just get caught in the weeds because someone told us to do something, or we think we should write this test, or we think we should do this. But if it's not moving the needle forward within your team or within the quality of the product, maybe question that a little bit so we can reprioritize, so we can have a greater impact. In order to move forward, though, always understand and break down where you're at now, especially if you know where you're at then and you want to start taking some action items, break them down into chunks that are digestible and completable. Don't just set yourself up for failure by trying to tackle some large, grand thing all at once or everything single phase all at once. Break it down, and that way you can always see yourself moving forward one bit at a time. Remember that effort awards. The more that you care and the more energy that you put into your work, the more you're going to get out of it. It's just the way of life. It's why the very first phase of an impactful automation test suite is why we care about the result in the first place, having confidence. It's that effort to actually care. So if you don't care about that, then nothing else that matters or that we've talked about or that you do is going to bring impact to your team. You're just going to build kind of this feeble pyramid that is doomed to fall at some point. There's a lot we've talked about. Always be patient and learn, though, of course. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. You're not perfect. Nobody is. And that sounds harsh, but we should accept that. And it should be okay to fail because of that. I make mistakes every single day, but as long as you're constantly learning, constantly understanding the why, we can always move this ship forward and ensure that we're not cutting corners. We're constantly growing ourselves. Okay, and then finally, again, we've been talking about a ton. There is so much to getting to an impactful test automation suite. It's not going to happen alone. It's going to happen if full team support. But just remember, automation and what we do is really important to building an effective team and an effective application. So just celebrate your wins, celebrate yourself, because what you're doing is meaningful. So it could be easy to get down, especially when there's a ton of failures and a ton of requirements and frustration, but celebrate the wins when they come. That way you're always, applauding yourself and your efforts. So thank you so much. I know that was a lot. Hopefully this has helped maybe put perspective on impact and automation and help you get a plan to move your own automation tests forward someday. So thank you again for this opportunity and have a wonderful Cypress Conf.
Thank you, David. That was an amazing talk, and thank you for walking us through the stages of your test practice maturity. I would like to take a question from the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and share that on the screen. Our first question is, what's a good strategy to choose which test should be run in a pre-merge pipeline?
I think it just depends on where your application is and how many tests you have. Let's say if you have only a few tests, I would say run everything. If you can afford it at first, run everything. Why not? Because if you run everything, that's also just going to tell you the health of every single test as well. Because if you're only running half your tests and the other half just aren't being ran, those tests could actually be very flaky and you don't know about it. So I always encourage you to run everything first if you can afford it. That way you get everything to a confident state. And then if there's cost impacts, performance impacts, then you just need to work with which tests are the highest use case, the highest impact, those core user flows in your application that should always run. So every test case should be associated to some sort of priority impact in your application as like a core test case. This is a core user flow. We have to run it every time versus it's more of an edge case. Maybe it doesn't have to run every time. So you should have those conversations within your team. And if you aren't sure, usually product or other engineers can help you with that.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take one more before we switch over to the next session. So when running tests pre-merge, how do you manage ensuring that the tests don't dramatically slow down deployment? Wondering what strategies have been successful to balance time to deploy with confidence pre-deploy?
This is, I believe it really just comes down to the overall concept of shifting left, which is full team buy-in. If you are the only one on your team who is just screaming and saying, we need to have pre-merge and product wants to ship really fast and engineering, doesn't care about your results, you're going to fail. That is a recipe for disaster. So it all comes down just to the mentality of buy-in quick. That is it. It's just buy-in. You need to have your entire team bought into taking your test seriously. It's a mentality and it's an entire team mentality where you have to be invested in that. It's going to slow things down at first, but it's also going to speed things down significantly long-term. So yeah, I agree. It might slow down your deployments initially, but you have to have that buy-in or find the balance with product so that you are allowed and allocated extra time to work on those flaky tests. Because if you don't, then again, we're just invalidating everything.
Awesome. Thank you again, David. We really appreciate the time you've given us today and sharing your insights.